is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. I am so excited about today's episode because I'm going to be answering a question that all of you have been asking me in the comments box below when it comes to heirloom vegetables as to how new heirloom vegetables come about. How do you get a new vegetable from old ones? And so I'm going to be answering that question, but I'm also going to be bringing you along for something very exciting that we touched on early last year, or I guess late last year in the fall. And it was when we harvested our squash. We actually had something very exciting happen that only happens very, very rarely. And about one out of 1,000 cases, this will happen, and it allows you to create a new variety. So I want to first answer the first question, which is how do new varieties occur? And that will kind of segue into what happened to us and the exciting opportunity that we were given to make a brand new variety. So, like I said, a new variety can happen one of two ways. It can happen via cross-pollination, which is where you take two different types of, or two different vegetables of the same family. So tomato, for instance, and let's say one is red and large, the other one is yellow and small, and you cross them. If those genetics are stabilized, they are heirloom, and they have no, cross-pollination going on, that means their genetics are stabilized. You have a red large, yellow small. You cross the two and you'll get a cross of many different traits. Sometimes you won't even end up with a fruit, anything different with the fruit. Sometimes it might be that the red tomato was determinate and the yellow tomato was indeterminate. Well, now the red tomato might be indeterminate. You can never really tell what the plant is going to select. There's something that biologists call a Punnett square, and a Punnett square basically is the probability of certain traits occurring. And so if you take red and yellow, you have about a 50% chance of there's going to be a cross, and then there's going to be 25% chance of red and 25% chance of yellow. Now you will have also a 25% chance of a small tomato, 25% chance of a large tomato, and then about 50% chance of a mix. And that goes with anything. It's very unpredictable, and it gives you basically a bird shot. It's pretty much like throwing a dart blind. You're going to hit something on the board, but you're not really sure what you're going to end up with because biology works in strange ways. With that being said, there's another way that new varieties can come about, and it's actually the best way. It's our favorite way because it's the most consistent, it's the most stable, and it's the most predictable, and that's through mutations. Mutations will only happen about 1 out of 1,000 to 1 out of every 10,000. It's very, very, very rare. And in my entire time as a gardener, I've never seen a mutation except for one time, I guess, and that was with the squash. So a mutation, a lot of you are probably thinking mutation, that's bad. We don't want mutations. Mutations, when it's talking about genetics, are actually good. Mutations are something that you take something, it could be a purebred dog, or in this case, a purebred heirloom vegetable. An heirloom is basically a purebred. It could be a greyhound, a chihuahua, a pit bull, I don't even know. But then you also have purebred vegetables, which are like Waltham butternut squash or beefsteak tomato, something that's been grown, and the genetics are very consistent and they're saved year after year after year. Well, the genetic code is like, I don't know, building blocks or train tracks, so whatever, something that connects. I don't know. I'm trying to make this seem simple for everyone because I know not all of you are biologists, and I don't want to confuse you guys, but the genetic code is like this. Well, every once in a while, what can happen is they split. And when they split, the genetic code needs to be filled. It can't just stay separate. So that means another piece of the genetic code will fit. And when that fits, it'll be totally different than the original. Just that one piece is totally different. And that's what can happen as a mutation. Generally, you don't lose any color or flavor or plant characteristics other than size and shape. Size and shape are the two things that predominantly affect when you're talking about mutations. A common example of this is a tomato that all of you have probably seen or heard of, and it's called the brain tomato. Now, a brain tomato started out as a cherry tomato, but what happened was all the flowers on the cherry tomato got fused together, and it created this giant mass of tomatoes, all one. Now, it was still the same color, still the same flavor, the plant grew exactly the same, the fruit was just misshapen. You can also see this with dwarf tomatoes. So a true dwarf tomato, it's called I believe it's the Tiny Tim tomato. The Tiny Tim tomato was a true dwarf. Now, a lot of people think that dwarfism is like a GMO trait or something that shouldn't be promoted in the garden, but this is actually an heirloom. A long time ago, a gardener was growing these tomatoes and it just stopped growing, but it kept producing fruit. It had the same size cherry tomatoes. It had the same flavor cherry tomatoes. Everything was the same about it. It's just the plant was smaller. Now, when you do look at cross-pollination or mutations, you do still have to stabilize that genetic trait. So in our case with the squash, there you go, there's the squash, you can see it. It's a little ugly, I know. It got frozen in the garage and then it unthawed and it started molding. So I gotta save the seeds before they become inviable. But with the squash, I'm still going to have to grow out these seeds, okay? In our case, we got a very super long, here I'll hold it up for you. We got a super long-necked, very small seed cavitied butternut squash. Tastes exactly the same. Plants yield exactly the same. Everything is exactly the same except for the shape. And what the shape is so nice for is harvesting the piece that you use to cook. The seed cavity is the most difficult part about a butternut squash. And for years, people have been trying to breed out that really big bulb at the bottom of butternut squash. And so you have a lot of hybrids, F1 hybrids and things like that, that are grown to be more of a blocky, not a blocky pepper, but a blocky squash, so that there's less seed cavity you have to cut around, and it's a little bit more convenient for the home cook or for market, selling it for its usable value. And so this variety now is something that we can utilize because most of this is edible. Most of this is an incredible asset to us as a gardener when it comes to food production. There's less waste, there's less hassle, it's just better. And we didn't have to do anything, we didn't have to cross anything, it just happened. But we want this to stay this way. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to grow it out for several generations, because some of the seeds, regardless of the mutation or not, some seeds will revert back to the traditional butternut squash. And that means that we have to have some to select from that will exhibit this mutation. About 50% will exhibit this mutation and about 50% will revert back. And so we have to have enough of a sample size to continue selecting for this trait. Another thing that we will have to do is we'll also have to select, or we'll also have to bag our flowers. From the plants that we select, we'll have to bag them and hand pollinate so that there's no risk of cross-pollination, because what that can do is then the old butternut squash, the correct shape butternut squash, will cross with the mutated butternut squash, and then you get another cross. And that is really what kind of keeps things kind of going haywire. So as long as we can stabilize this and isolate it, in fact, I'd probably even take those plants out that aren't showing the right trait, so that way there's even less risk of cross-pollination. I'll probably just rip those right out and keep the ones that are exhibiting that trait. And then all we have to do is just continue doing that for about 2 years to maybe 3 years at most. And once you have 3 generations, it should be stabilized to the point where you can name it, and it will then be considered an open pollinated variety. Once it's open pollinated, then it has to be grown for about 30 years for it to be considered heirloom. So open pollinated is a stable genetic trait. So let's get these seeds saved. I'm gonna cut these squash open here, and we're gonna save the seeds, dry them out, and then we're gonna grow them. I'm very excited because we've already picked out a name. All of you have voted on the name, and we'll be calling this variety a butterneck. So this is going to be the future butterneck squash. Very, very excited about it, and it's something that we are going to be doing a lot of videos on in this coming year. I really want to get this growing and stabilized. I just can't wait. It's just such a beautiful squash. So when it's not all moldy, of course. So I'm gonna get some gloves on and we're gonna harvest these seeds. All right, so we're gonna cut this open here. Give you a really good idea of the seed cavity here. So, like I said, it was such a shame that it froze, because ideally I would have liked to eat these because you could still save the seeds while you enjoy them, but we had that Arctic blast come through and kind of ruined our day. But as you can see, look at how beautiful. I mean, absolutely, it's so, I mean, it's stunning how orange this is. The camera does absolutely no justice for how orange this flesh is. But, and we're talking, all of this is perfectly usable. Look at the seed cavity here. This is what I'm talking about. The seed cavity is very, very, very small in comparison to a butternut squash, where it's about double that size, and it really curves out. This is much more of a straight squash. In fact, this one here that's really in bad shape. There was almost no bend to it where the seed cavity is. In fact, the seed cavity is right here. That's all it is this little, in fact, there's no seed cavity even there. The seed cavity is this. It's the size of a baseball. And the rest is all usable flesh. So very, very exciting. I'm so excited about this. We're just gonna peel these seeds out here. Looks like we made squash already. But this will go, the rest will go in the compost pile. So it's not a wash yet, but very few seeds. And even though the squash is soft and clearly not in its prime, the smell coming off of it is actually, it's really incredible. It's very nutty. There's no, it's not like a pungent, it's not a pungent smell, and it doesn't really smell like rotting pumpkins. Oh my gosh, name one smell worse than a rotting pumpkin. It's just putrid. But this does not have that bad of a smell. So it's actually really, really kind of enjoyable and therapeutic to save these seeds here. All right, got all the seeds out of the seed cavities. Those will go in the compost pile, and this one there. And so now we're going to just take the seed and wash it off and get it all dried up and ready to grow again. So really nice. But I mean, that's honestly, from 2 squash, that's about half of what you get from just 1 regular butternut squash. It's just incredible how few seeds it produces. All right, so there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And if anything, I hope this serves as an example to get out there and save your seeds. You never know what you're going to come across. You never know what type of luck you're going to have. And this is also a great example of just something that can happen. But a lot of times, you're not going to come across a mutation. You might get a crazy cross. Who knows? But the fact of the matter is that saving your seeds is an essential component to securing, or to ensuring, food security. Because you never know when the next pest or disease is going to come around, and you might just have the genetic strain that prevents the disease or is not susceptible to the pest, and it might just be the key to saving the entire variety. We've seen so many varieties just become extinct, and that's because we keep saving, we keep buying seed rather than saving seed. And I always say, there's nothing wrong with buying seed every year, but there is something very satisfying about having your own. And you'll find that maybe in 5 to 10 years, your own variety is completely unique from the rest of the world's variety, because you've had it in your same growing conditions for so long that you might just have something all new and brand new that is different from everything else. And it's just that robustness that you look for in the genetic pool that makes biodiversity so important and so, it's so critical to food security. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. Save your seeds. Let me know in the comments box below if you do save seeds, some seeds that you saved, some weird crosses that you've had. Just let me know what's going on in your garden, and I'll read them. I love reading your comments. So thank you guys so much for your support. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. We'll catch y'all later. See ya. Bye.